um, really our servant leaders. So we have core services that we sign up for that we have to do. Core services optional. Some are required. Some are recommended. Some are optional. And so what we did this year was lay out this plan and try it for the first quarter to map out the entire year for our core services. And this is what you see. I'm going to make this larger. And Danielle, our newest DASM, our digital discipline agile, she is our VP of operations, and she made this visual. Let's see if I can, where's my, okay. Where's my, he's trying to blow it up here. There we go. So this will give you an idea, and I'm sure that our Northeast Ohio and Pittsburgh, they have these core services that we have to, so this is what we're doing. And so we've laid this out for the full year. And so here we are in June, and it just reflects some of the work that our team is doing on behalf of our members. And again, really wanted to shout out to our volunteers and our servant leaders who put this together. And so you see all of the core services here on the right, on the left side, and then the various reports that we put out to support these initiatives and to track them as well on a monthly basis. So again, thanks. Let me share this with you on behalf of all of our folks. So I'm going to stop sharing. Just really, the team is just doing amazing work here. I'll give it back to you, Amir.
Yeah, I will share now. Just a minute.
Thank you. And then the last slide was just a shout out to connect with us on social media. We are on Insta, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So we'd love to connect with you if we haven't. And for those that, so look forward to joining you on social media. Thanks everyone, and Bruce, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for joining us today. Bruce, he has a 25 years experience of managing large complex programs. His public speak experience includes presenting at both regional and international professional conference, such as a PMI Global Conference, Chicago, Los Angeles, and he presented or he was a seminar facilitator for PMI Seminars World since 2019. Bruce, without taking too much time, mic is yours. The mic is yours, Bruce.
All right, thank you, Amir.
I'll stop sharing, so, yep.
All right. Excellent. All right, so I'm very pleased to be here speaking to both Northeast Ohio chapter and the Central Virginia chapter here this June evening. We are going to spend about the next 60 minutes discussing design thinking. And this is a space that I'm very passionate about, and I've been a student of this area for the past 6 years. As a project manager, I'm going to reinterpret design thinking and the methodologies of user-centered design into the language that we know as project managers. It is not always intuitive, but it is actually very useful in having our teams incorporate these methodologies. And you'll be surprised, your teams are probably already doing a lot of this work. So today's session, I'm going to give you a high-level overview of design thinking methods and tools. You should have received an email that had some additional resources in it. That's going to provide you links to further materials. These are all free. That's the good thing, the list, and I'll have another list of that. I'm going to talk about the benefits in incorporating design thinking, and that is really to arm you with some vocabulary that you can use to win over people in your organization or help them understand the benefits, primarily those in the C-suite or the leadership group. And then lastly, we're going to start off this session with a hands-on sketching exercise. And what it's going to teach us is that being visual, getting ideas and concepts out of our heads and onto paper can help to clarify and make the communication you have much more crisp. And it's also a very important part of design. So as Emma mentioned, please, if you want to ask questions, feel free to go off mute and just say, excuse me, Bruce, I have a question. I'm very open for questions during the session. We will also be monitoring the chat, so use that. And then I'm also going to have you use the chat several times. So here is one question that I want those of you in the audience today from Ohio and Virginia and Mexico and Jakarta and Belgium, and there's lots of California. There's people from everywhere. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, how familiar are you with design thinking? So I'm seeing quite a bit of 1s, a couple of 2s. Someone had a 4. So 3.5. Okay, someone's very specific there. Tony Lee has a 4. That's okay. So you might actually use design thinking at your organization. A 0. Okay, so this is typical when I speak to project managers or business analysts or other management types. Most in North America, we are not too familiar with design thinking. And so this is, it is nothing, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's actually, it's important that you're joining tonight because we're going to learn a bit more. So as I mentioned, we're going to do a warm-up exercise, and it is going to sort of prove to you how being visual is much more allowing you to do more precise communication. And you should have received a printout, a PDF that was looking similar to like this. However, if you haven't had a chance, you can still just take a white piece of paper and divide it into 8 different sections. So it's 1 line through the middle and 3 lines here. You're going to need 8 blocks to be able to draw within. And for those of you, again, I see a couple people in chat that said that they didn't have the document. It's just as easy to draw this type of diagram here with a with your pen and paper. So we are going to do some sketching now, and I'm going to give you a 60 seconds to draw some words that we have here. And if you're ready to go, start drawing right now. You've got 60 seconds. Now, we're project managers, so what you draw does not have to be perfect. And quite often, my sketches turn out to look like stick figures. These words were chosen carefully. 1 or 2 of them are a little complex. You have 30 seconds to go. Fifteen seconds. All right. So let's stop, and we're going to review these sketches. I'm doing research, and so when you have a chance, take a photo of your sketches on your phone and send them. My email is there on the slide. It doesn't have to be right now. It can be after the session, but I collect all this, and we basically go through and we code what people draw, and you'll see that based on regional, cultural, and even sort of environmental biases, you'll see that different words will mean different things. Oh, I see a fellow by the name of John is already sharing that. So yeah, no, perfect. That is awesome, John. All right, so some of these have different meanings, and so let's start with the word mouse. Who drew the animal for the mouse? So type in the chat animal. Yep. All right, we got animals. All right, now while they're typing an animal, who drew a computer mouse? Type in computer. Up computer, we're getting a couple more of those. So you'll see that there's when we look at this and when I run this exercise, it can vary anywhere from a third to a half being animal to computer. And that's one of the areas that when we say the one word, it comes out different. Now let's look at the word computer. Who drew a desktop versus a laptop? So I want to see how many people are doing abacus. Okay, very good. Desktops. So we're getting quite a few desktops coming up here. Laptop. iPhone. Okay, very good, very good. Display, iPad, thin client setup. Good, good. Did anyone draw a Macintosh? Every now and then we get someone who draws a monitor with the Apple on the back of it. Any Macs? Doesn't look like it from this group. So, okay, so there is one. That happens rarely, but it does happen. So there's some Mac Airbook. So there's a small percentage of people. Now, this next one is really a much more cultural question. What did you draw for the coffee? Was it a cup with steam coming out of it, or a to-go cup? So a to-go cup, sort of like the Starbucks to-go cup. Hot coffee, cup of steam, mug, beans grinder, and cup. Okay, awesome. So I've actually, now that I've seen, I'm trying to watch the chat. 2 or 3 people put down beans. That actually is very rare, and it's interesting because usually when this exercise is run, people are talking about the final product. They're talking about what they're drinking, and when I've run this in cold climates, it's sort of the coffee cup. And when I've done this exercise in North America, there's quite a few people with to-go cups. When I ran this exercise in Jamaica, they're a very tea-based, because it was a former British colony. When they drew coffee, they drew it as a mug with steam. But the fact that some people drew beans is interesting, because that is coffee. It's just a different representation of coffee. Dinosaur. All right, Robert. That one's so far out in left field. I don't know how that goes together. All right, lastly, this is one that we're going to see perhaps a difference between the Ohio citizens and the Virginia citizens. Did you draw a home with a chimney or without a chimney? So it's with or without? Without chimney, without. Okay, I'm seeing a good mix here. Yeah, without a chimney. Beach and the palm tree. All right. Yep, that's my home had no chimney but people. Hey, Robert, that's a good one too. So the word was home. So that was a trick. The fact that it wasn't necessarily a house, but home can also mean the people. It doesn't necessarily mean the structure. So if you think about this, when your teams are given a requirement and it says something like one word, they're obviously not going to get something that's simple, but we have all taken this one word and have interpreted it in different ways. So again, when you have a chance, take a photo of what you sketched and email that to me. And there's my address, bruce.gay@astrevo.com. And here's just a collection of recent sketches. This weekend, after I get everyone's sketches, I'll return a PDF to everybody. But as you can see here, on the upper left, we had someone that had a very detailed mouse, very much like the Mickey Mouse. Over here on the right, this person did not only the structure, but showed a family surrounding in the house. Feedback that I get from a lot of people is the bicycle is the hardest item to sketch. And so typically people either don't start sketching it, or they start it and it sort of shows up like this. We didn't talk about bread, but bread is another cultural difference. This loaf here that you can see in the center, this was drawn from somebody in Switzerland. So the baguettes and the European shapes of breads show up when you mention the word bread to Europeans. In America and in Canada, we will have the sliced bread, and that's what will end up happening. So being visual is key to design thinking. and the thing is to get your ideas, concepts, and artifacts out so that your users can start reacting to them. And what you see here are a couple examples of both whiteboards. On the bottom right is a project war room type of thing, and then the bottom left is an exercise we did with some users at my company to be able to have them define and prioritize some of their requirements. So what is design thinking? I'm sure if you Google design thinking, you're going to get a lot of different ideas and a lot of different descriptions. But the one that I like and that resonates me as a project manager is that it's a user-centered methodology that embraces trial and error, and you use the immediate feedback through the testing of prototypes. So these are the key elements. And if you look at this, some of this does overlap with other methodologies. And so you can see the iterative testing of prototypes, that overlaps quite a bit with the more pure Agile or Scrum framework. Experimenting of trial and error, you see overlaps with architecture and the way how they will do models and then have feedback on them. But these four elements here at the bottom are the key pieces to what is important about design thinking. All right, so this is a yes/no question for the chat. Who here uses customer personas or user personas with their teams in their work? So who has these types of documents? Starting to use them? Okay, a lot of no's. Yes. Okay, so this seems pretty typical. I'm gonna share with you now. This is an example of a user persona that my program team built up about 3 years ago. So I work in a large hospital system in Western Pennsylvania, and we were working with a large healthcare IT vendor to put in a new radiology platform. And so this is a persona of one of a generic radiologist. And so this particular document here that you see, and this is a portion of it, it was built over many hours of interviewing the doctors, sitting and watching the doctors do their work. But what it shows is it's an artifact that you can now use with new people who join your team to better understand the users, as well as having folks that like the software engineer or tester who may never get out of the office and into the environment of your users. And so what we've documented here, and these are fairly common elements, is you have the goals of this user. So this individual, radiologists want to get their work done. They're given a list to work through during the day. They want to be accurate in their diagnoses of these problems, and they want to be efficient. They want to be quick. The pain points that they have is that they have to log into multiple software systems. Finding and communicating with physicians within the hospital is pretty difficult. Quite often they were having to page or call people. And these radiologists also didn't have the full patient view. Even though a lot of records in the medical field are now digitized, as with any large system, meaning healthcare system or large organization, a lot of the data sits in silos. And so these doctors, they would get incomplete pictures of the patients. And so the quote up in the blue part was really, we after interviewing them, the insight we pulled from this was that at the end of reviewing a patient's case and reviewing the scan that they had done, they felt like they solved a puzzle. And not that it was necessarily a dopamine hit, but they really enjoyed getting to that point where they can feel, hey, I finished this. I know, and I'm able to finish the diagnosis and then move on to the next one. And so part of that informed, could we change the user interfaces for this, for the system we were using based on that? Now, design thinking is definitely a different approach than what we're used to in the project management field. So when we think of projects at its most basic level, it's a fairly linear, now granted, we do have agile programs, but it's a fairly linear activity where there's planning, there's analysis, there's development, there's evaluation and verification, and then you end a project. This is really what design thinking and user-centered design looks like. It's a much more chaotic squiggle where there's a lot of research and trial and error and going forward and backing up at the beginning of the process. But then what you also see in this diagram, and I'll speak to it again, there is this divergence, and then it converges to a design. And that's where, as you can see, the squiggles start to get more smaller and more steady the further along you get into the process, until finally you have something that you've vetted with your users and is being built. And so I find when showing this squiggle to project managers, this tends to resonate, and even designers in this field say, yes, this is sort of a good visual representation of how chaotic and trial and error their work can be. So then a big piece of design thinking too is collecting and understanding the needs and requirements of the users. And so there is business analysis that does this, but the way business analysis tackles this is they go in to solve a known problem, and they decompose and break down that problem into the parts, and then they try to test out things, and it relies on proof. And so what this is showing on the left-hand side here is that you're going from what we know already, and you're converging into a solution or a product. Design, on the other hand, sort of starts by saying, let's figure out what the problem is, do some research, do some trial and error, come up with a bunch of ideas that we can then test, and then start to down select from those ideas. And so that in itself results in this diamond. And you'll see this diamond as part of design thinking in many different places. So you're starting off on the left-hand side of the diamond, where you're trying to frame the problem. You get to understand your users, the environment, and the problem space better. And then when you get to that point where you understand the problem, then you're starting to look at the solutions, and you're converging back into the solution space. So I'm hoping this is resonating, or at least it's educational at this point. Any questions from anyone in the audience at this point? Is the business analyst taking at face value the diagnostic from the client? Gregor, can you restate the question? I'm not quite certain how to answer your question there, if you're open to.
Yeah, no, I wanted to know because you say they are coming from a known problem. Is it a problem that the client proposed as a problem, or is it a pain point that they had to define clearly the problem?
Yeah. So good question. So quite often, as you know, we're handed projects that already have a charter, or this has been a business case has been approved, and typically in that business case approval process, they've already defined the problem. When you utilize design thinking, it can start before you get to the business case. So you're actually trying to define the problem. I think what I'm pointing out here with this approach is that the business analysts typically inherit or absorb a direction from either a business case or a sponsor, or the business is asking for something to be solved. The problem is already concrete and known. So it's usually that's the starting point where design thinking works well, even getting to better understand the problem. So I hope that answers there. Good.
I'm there.
Thank you.
Hi, Sarah. Yes. Okay. Didn't know if you had a question. So we're gonna cover one of the most common design thinking models out there, and it's from the Stanford Design School. It has 5 stages, and you will find this diagram here all over the internet. I found it's the easiest. It's the one that resonates with me. It's uncomplicated. So I'm going to go over these 5 stages with you, and know that these stages aren't linear. They could be linear, but there's also some iteration and circle backs that happen in this. So the first stage, and I've mentioned this, and what we need to do for personas is to conduct the research with your users. And this is interacting with them. It's observing them. It's taking notes. it's seeing how they interact with your product or service in their environment. And so what we did, and I'll show you a picture of this later on, we actually had designers and other individuals from my team go into the hospital, down onto the floors where these radiologists were working. Some of them would work behind the emergency department, others were in the radiology department, but we would go and observe them in their actual workplace. And obviously the emergency department's a lot more busy than the radiology department, but it was actually doing the research in that space. And then, so the next step is, after doing the research, then having your team come back together and take all that research and look through it and observe where you're seeing problems for your users. And this is sort of the synthesis and definition phase. And you start to extract what are the needs of our users. And this is where your team needs to focus on coming up with a problem statement. And this is where, coming out of this stage here, you have a clear understanding of what the problem is that you and your team want to address. Now, obviously, depending on the contract mechanism or how your business plan was set up, you may have to negotiate with the sponsors. Okay, we may not be tackling the right problem, or you need to work with your sponsors to say, this is the direction that we think needs to be taken. So as a project manager, we could consider this as a stage where we need to really understand what is the scope that our team has identified as the problem, and does that scope match with what we have in our contract documents. And that is something where, then it turns into stakeholder engagement and trying to work with folks to make sure that they understand the direction. Now, one of the big things about trial and error that's part of design thinking is doing the ideation. And this is the one you see most on the internet, with people with a lot of sticky notes and they're brainstorming different things. The goal of this stage is really to come up with multiple solutions, and they can be very harebrained to very conservative. But the goal here is to have a multidisciplinary team think about the problem space and think about solutions. Now, obviously, 95 to 99% of those solutions are going to be thrown away, but the fact that you've gone through that process really helps enrich the final solution in the end. And as I mentioned, and it states here, harness the collective perspective of the team. I find that this works when you have the engineers, the quality, you have your analysts, and it's important to have everybody in the team there. Yeah, Robert Tracy had a really good note in chat. So one of the things that you'll see about design thinking is it really makes you slow down to ensure that you're tackling the right problem, rather than trying to jump in with a technical solution. So if you notice, we haven't even gotten to any construction or development at this point. We're still at the problem definition and starting to look at what's going on. So the other thing too that design thinking encourages is building these solutions, and they can be very lightweight, they can be cheap. So I'll show in my case studies later on, you can use whiteboards to do prototyping. And the goal here is to make sure that you have your ideas and concepts are physical, so that your users or other stakeholders can react with them. And you then take these prototypes and you will take them out and start testing with them. And that's where you return to your users for validation and correction. And so this is where you're starting to refine your solution. And it's at this point, if you're doing Scrum, you can start building out your user stories, or you can, if you're doing the more waterfall, you start speccing out what those requirements are. So these are just, this is a screenshot. There's a lot of different ways of defining and showing the stages of design thinking. The thing to remember here is that it's very chaotic. It's not always linear. And it's something that I, even in my career, when I started managing user-centered designers and we were doing design thinking, I had to sort of wrap my head around, okay, how do I make sure and make sure they stay on track and that their budget is within the budget and that they're delivering as we needed. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but it can be done. So in this section, actually, before I go to this, any questions about the 5-stage model from the Stanford Design School? All right. So I'm going to arm you now. Oh, someone wrote, sounds like we need to define the what before the how. Yep. Is one better than the other? Caroline, I don't know if you can, maybe you'll have to clarify that, and I'll get back to your question there. All right, so these are things that you can use to share within your organization and how design thinking helps the organization overall. So design drives business value. And there's an organization called the Design Management Institute that is involved in promoting design and doing workshops. And they also put together a value index, a design value index several years back, where they looked at a series of corporations that use design and have design embedded within their organization and are and are very mature around their design practices. And some of these companies are the ones that we would think top of mind that have really good design practices. So like Apple and Walt Disney, Black & Decker, Starbucks. And they found that compared to other companies, they showed a much better return on investment at the Standard & Poor over a 10-year period. And then in 2018, the McKinsey & Company followed that up and did a study of their own companies that they consulted with. And they looked at a group of 300 companies that had design practices within them. And they found that those that had mature design practices did indeed have higher return on investments and had a better return for their shareholders. So this was building on the design value index, and it shows that by incorporating design and these practices into your projects and your organizations, one, you get to know your customers better, but then you're also able to make money as well. So design helps you to mitigate some risk and failure. What I'm showing here is a sort of representation that the Consumer Electronic Association, they did a study in 2011. They were trying to figure out why people were returning consumer electronics when they actually worked well or they worked as they were supposed to. And they found out that of the consumer electronics that were returned to the companies, 5% of them actually had defects. A little over a quarter had buyer's remorse, but 2/3 actually worked as designed, but didn't meet the user's expectations. So they were either too cumbersome, the user interfaces were too complex, or people didn't know how to use them, so they brought them back. And what they found was that this was this was a lot of waste, because not having the users further upstream in their development process, they were pushing out these goods that were not actually meeting the needs of the consumers. And back in 2019, they were saying that this was a cost that was close to $1.9 billion in the US. Misleading marketing. Yeah, good one. Good. Yeah, Robert, that's definitely true. All right. Has anyone ever heard of Tom Gilb? Go ahead and put yes in the chat. So he's a guru around software engineering. Tom Gilb. A lot of no's. All right, you'll have to look him up sometime. What I'm sharing here is something that he published back in 1988. And he basically said, it is much cheaper to find and address defects earlier in the process. And he said, the cheapest is to find them in design when you still are working through the requirements and the design phase. By the time you get to the development of your product or service, it costs 10 times more to find and fix something. And then obviously after you've launched something, it's 100 times more. So design and design thinking focuses in further to the left. And so this is the point where you're really trying to nail down the requirements and finding the needs of your users, and you're also trying to identify the defects in that space as well. So design and design thinking help reduce the overall cost. All right. When I first started doing user testing and my teams are coming to me and say they needed to find users and they needed to run through multiple user tests with them, how many people do you think you need to test with to reach what's called sample size saturation? How many individuals do you need to include in the test? So give some numbers here. And you'll see on the next slide, there's a certain number, you can get about 85% of the usability defects. So we've ranged everywhere from 5 to 10 to 20 to 15 to 7, 7 to 15, 10, as many as I can find. Well, Greg, that's going to be very expensive. I don't know if you want to do that. All right, here's the answer. It's 5. And there's research that's been done on this, is that with 5 users, you catch about 85% of your usability defects. And you know, more than that, it gets into what we would call polishing the stone, perhaps. And I've seen this even at work with my own program. When we had prototypes and we were testing them with the doctors, by the time we had maybe the 7th or 8th doctor come in and test a prototype, we were getting the same themes and the same comments back time over time that we heard from the first 5 or 6 individuals. So what this says is that as project managers, we should be able to plan and budget for user testing with a very small number of individuals. And we can catch a large number of defects in that process. So good guessing, folks that were up in the teens, that gets expensive when you get that many people in your user testing. So, and then design thinking, I think several people have commented on this. It helps you do the right thing. It's finding the what before the how. And it works well and is very complementary to Lean Six Sigma, Agile, and other traditional project management methodologies. Before I move to the case studies, any questions about the benefits or how to communicate the benefits of incorporating design into your projects?
Bruce, we have a question from the previous subject about 5 process of design.
This right here?
In the chat, it's from Greg. Let me just back in.
All right, yeah. Go ahead and send it again. I think I missed it.
Yeah, if you are a consultant at a client who thinks he knows the problem, how do you show with some facts the benefit of going through the problem definition stage?
Good point. So one of the key things is to collect the quotes from your user base. So if you're able to, you're always going to have what we call a big voice in the room. That's the individual. It could be a sponsor. It could be a C-suite individual. It could be someone who has a lot of sway in the development of whatever solution or product that you're doing. But by collecting the data, you can show, for example, X number of these users have described this being complicated and they would like to do X, Y, and Z. And you can do that both in a quantitative and a qualitative manner. So we've used those types of research details to, how would I say it, persuade our product managers to invest in areas that we found were where the problems were based on our users. And then Laura had a good question here. Who facilitates the design sessions? And so in my case, what I've had in my career, I've had user experience designers or interaction designers who've worked on my teams. They are typically trained and understand how to do the contextual inquiry. These are the types of of interviews and interactions, and the testing. And it's a real skill, because you can pull someone off who does product demos and ask them to do user testing. They may still introduce bias into the process. You really want to keep it neutral. So these are individuals who've been trained and have done training around how to solicit feedback in a neutral manner from your users. So the facilitation of the design sessions, I would really turn that over to individuals who are much more experienced. I could run some facilitations, but I'm definitely, I know my limitation. I'm not as good as others are. Let's see, Bob asked, are technical people a part of the design from the start, or do the BAs get a head start in personas before the technical team arrives? Yes, so typically in the second part of your question there, I have seen designers and business analysts, they start to do the research before the technical team arrives. And they are the ones who are trying to tell the story of the user using the persona to tell the story. Now, you also don't want to wait to have the technical teams further down the process. You want to start incorporating them into the ideation phase. Those are, if you know, those in the audience that knew of JAD, so joint application design sessions, that would be another case where you want to have multidisciplinary individuals in the same room. So you don't necessarily have to have your tech team involved at the very, very beginning, but you don't want to leave them to the end either. Good question, Bob. All right, so let's go into a case study that I have here, and this is from my hospital, and this is for the radiology systems. And what you see here are some of our radiologists from the abdominal department, and that's the piece that sort of takes the scans from your neck to your abdomen. And that 4 monitor system in front of them is what we were working on with them. And the problem space that we had here, and I mentioned this earlier on in my presentations, that there were multiple data silos. Like any large organization, we had mergers and acquisitions, and so we had data residing in multiple places, and the doctors had to log into multiple systems just to get their job done for one patient sometimes. I mentioned earlier too that they didn't always know why the patient was there. There was data that was contained in upstream systems that didn't always flow downstream. And then lastly, these systems had been around for 15 years. So as you can imagine, that more modern user interfaces had been, there have been several generations of improvements in, say, Windows or Apple. These systems were sort of how they were 15 years ago, and they had really bad pop-up menus and right mouse button clickers. So my leadership about 8 years ago decided that by using design thinking and bringing in designers into our product development teams, it would produce a better product that would be both higher quality and more accepted by doctors. And for those of you who don't work in the healthcare system, most of our users, they tend to be fairly conservative in adoption because there are ways that they've been doing their work and it's worked for them. So when you want to change the way they do their work, they don't always like wanting to change. And so what we wanted to do was make sure that their experience with the new system was going to be as good as possible. So what we did was we embedded user experience designers into our Scrum development teams. We did quite a bit of early research and exploration with the doctors. We did a lot of looking at their experience, and we mapped the stages of their work during the day. There were a lot of designs and prototypes that we did. And we even had a lab in my office where we would have prototypes running, and we'd have doctors come by and they would evaluate the prototypes. And the picture you see here on the right is one of our designers that was doing what's called a card sorting exercise. And the goal of this exercise is really to have the user prioritize features and functionality, because as we all know, that with most budgets are finite. So you need to you need to sort of drive to what's the most important functionality needed. So she's working with this one doctor to prioritize various features there. So the results that we had over time, through rapid iteration of designs and making changes in the development cycles and the collaboration between our designers, developers, and the users, we were able to make sure that we could build out the new platform. And we were actually extending parts of the platform were still old technology, so C++, and that had its own limitations. And so there was things that we had to consider. And over time, as we did user testing, we also took usability evaluations. And over time, the satisfaction ratings went up the scale. And the bottom right here, where you see Johnny Lee, that is actually a screenshot of one of our test systems, but that is basically what we built. It's a workflow tool that allows the doctors to work through the patients that they have during their day. Any questions about the case study there? All right. So now we're getting to the home stretch here. So some of the takeaways I want you to have from today's webinar is that try to encourage your teams to do the user research and to understand the users and their environment. And we as project managers should be trying to build in the time in our schedules and the money in our budgets to allow that to happen. It just doesn't happen out of, you have to be very prescriptive with that. I encourage you to use more visualizations with your teams. Words mean a lot, and we're very good at communicating via words, but I think you can also see from the sketching exercise that we often bring our biases, and that my understanding of the word is going to be different than your understanding of the word. Several people in the chat mentioned this, but it's basically come up with ideas for your solutions before you jump into the problem solving space. And I think that's key. It's getting teams to slow down and work on their understanding the problem before they jump into solutions is important. Use prototyping and user testing early into in the project, and this will help you identify where you might miss some customer needs. As we've all been part of teams where something's been rolled out, and then you'll get some major edge cases where the customer will go, well, okay, we didn't think about these. And then think about iterative development cycles. And this is where it overlaps with Agile. Design thinking with its trial and error really encourages that level of go out, try something, see how it works, tweak it, try it again. And that's very important. And then lastly, multidisciplinary collaboration is important. You want to stamp down any groupthink that you have in your team. Now, I think one of the documents that was shared ahead of this included these design resources. I've given you a very, very high level view of design thinking. These are other resources to go to, and they're going to help you more with very tactical exercises that you can use with your teams. They're going to have all of these will have some level of tools and methods to do user research, tools and methods to do things for ideation other than just brainstorming, and even all the way to prototyping. So this will be available. I believe that the Northeast Ohio will send out the slides, but this is also in one of the pre information that we sent. All right, so let's take a moment here, and my ask of you now is, and write this in the chat, what is one thing you learned today that you think you'll bring back to your work either tomorrow or on Monday or Tuesday? So think about that. I'm hoping that you did get some new insight or some new idea that you'll be able to use with your teams. All right, so I'm seeing personas. Slow down and understand the users for sure. testing. Yep, 5-stage and the sample size. Yeah, I think that the sample size that gives, I think, in some ways, it doesn't become a big daunting thing. You can say, look, we can find a lot of the defects in our user interface or in the way of our service just by having 5 people move through it. Yep, the ROI, thank you, that's a good one. And personas, very good, yes. Sketching to problem solve, yes, thank you, Hillman, that's a good one, All right, so I am doing a full day workshop as part of the PMI seminars world in July. If you're interested, the QR code there will take you to the PMI website and for registration. We basically take what we've talked about here today and expand it out, and we do a full design challenge. It's also very interesting because design thinking requires a mindset of, as I mentioned earlier, to get things out of your head and to do things with it. So as we do our design challenge during this workshop here, the class attendees will build something. And obviously in a virtual world, we can still do that. We end up building things in our houses, but in the future, when we get back together, I've had some design sessions where the teams have built some really interesting solutions to some complicated healthcare problems. So if you're interested, the QR code's there, and this is for the PMI seminars world in July. And then lastly, I have a monthly newsletter, and I publish about project management and related topics. So please feel free to sign up. That's at brucegay.com, sign up. And like all of us, I enjoy networking, meeting new people. The QR code here will take you straight to my LinkedIn profile. So feel free to link in with me. And lastly, there's my email address. If you haven't already, please take a photo of your sketch and send it to me. I'll include that in my research. And as I mentioned, I'll be sending out a packet of everyone's sketch who attended from this session tonight. So Amir, I think we're open to questions right now.
Yeah, we are open to question. I will take the share.
Oh, one moment. You want me to stop sharing?
Yeah,
There you go. All yours.
thank you, I hope. Yeah, so now the open for question. Again, they can type it in the chat or open the mic and ask any question. Meanwhile, during this, I'll just go quickly through our events. We have in July 14th an event, Women in Project Management Virtual or Welcome 7/15/21. We have a Discipline Agile evening, 8/18/21. It's we back in person. We have a friendly Akron Rubber Ducks with Harrisburg Senators at Canal Park. So this is one of the in-person events we have, and in August 18th. Again, job fair will back in fall 2021. We did one in February 2021, and the next one will be in fall 2021. 11 on November 4th, 21. It's Northeast Ohio International Management Day. All these events, it's in northeastohio.org, PMINEO.org. Under event list, you can check our events. For claiming code, we will send the claiming code with the presentation and a link to the record video later. Finally, there's some tips for people who wants to keep their BDUs and again BDUs. One of them is attending Northeast Ohio chapter events or projectmanagement.com, and other two podcast options. That's all. And again, we're back to the questions.
And I forgot, I had some books to recommend too. So this was in one of the handouts I think I gave Amir that you circulated. So Design Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. These individuals, they're from Stanford. They basically took design thinking and applied it to career development, I guess is one way. So this is something you can do, and it has exercises in here for yourself to work through. And then not so important for us, but design thinking now has moved into other educational fields. So design thinking for leaders, training and development. So these ladies here, Sharon Bowler and Laura Fletcher, they just published this, and this is their approach to teach design thinking to people who do training, education, and it's excellent. It's very, very detailed. It's more detailed than you need, but I think that's their audience probably are very detail oriented. And then all the way from Germany, Michael Eric, Patrick Pink, they have something called the Design Thinking Playbook. And this has a lot of different activities that fit through the 5 stages. But again, the IDEO and the Stanford 5-stage process, those work very well, and you can get a lot of free information from those websites, and you don't have to buy the books and stuff like that to try out with your teams.
First, we have a question from Laura.
Mm-hmm.
How do you work with an organization to transition to a design thinking methodology, especially in more rigid environment like manufacturing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question.
Sorry, and the second part of it, how do you manage buy-in with describing that some of the process looks like course?
No, good question. I think I saw that earlier. So first of all, design thinking isn't appropriate for all environments. So let's use architecture and construction as 2 related adjacent environments. Architecture, in some ways, is the grandmother of design thinking. So if you think what an architect does, they go out, they understand the environment, the built environment, they understand what their customer or their client needs. They do models, they share those models for feedback, they adjust, and then they build the blueprints. At that point, it's handed off to the construction team. You're not doing design thinking any further with construction. So if it's something that's like construction, design thinking is going to work. And I think you had a question where it was a manufacturing. If it is a routine and repetitive process, design thinking really isn't going to help with that. That's where you're going to want to use other methodologies such as lean or others to make it improve it. Now, if you're in manufacturing and you want to expand your product line into other areas, then design thinking helps with market penetration, coming up with ideas for new markets, and that would be a fit. But design thinking is not it doesn't work in all environments.
Yeah, Bruce, we have another question from Hilman from Jakarta. Hi, Bruce. Any particular scenario, business case when design thinking is the best approach to problem solve? And what's the common pitfalls during design thinking execution?
Yeah, no. So the workshop that I have, we go into this in much greater detail because there's research done on why adoption fails. And there are several journals out of Berlin. The Germans have done quite a bit of research on this. They've looked at why, when teams have started to do design thinking, does it not stick? And there's many different reasons. One of them is there may not be C-suite or leadership buy-in. So you do need to have your top level, your executives in the know, and they have to be understanding the value of the methodology. The second is a lot of a lot of design thinkers in the world over the past decade, they will have these one-day workshops, and you have all your people go to a one-day workshop. Well, that is a one-day event. You're not necessarily going to be able to ingrain everything into what you need to do in that one day. And so having the right level of training, having the right level of repetitive understanding of a methodology is important to have it stick as well. And then third, people have to understand, just like with Agile, there are parts of organizations that can never be Agile. So finance, legal, real estate, construction, even if your development teams and product teams are Agile or using design thinking, there are other mechanisms and other groups within an organization that it's not going to work for them. So you do have to sort of figure out how you build those bridges and translate the data between those groups. And that's something my team that does modified Scrum, we have that same problem with our non-Agile organizations within our company.
Just a reminder for people who ask about the presentation. Yeah, we will send an email with the presentation, attached presentation, and the claim code for this claim code for BDU for this event. Any other questions? Andy said one of the guidelines of disciplined agile is to apply design thinking.
Oh, that's good to know. I'm not fully versed in DA yet. I have to rely on Dave Davies. I think you guys know him too. He seems to be the champion of DA in our region right now. Well, good. Again, reach out to me, link in with me. Feel free to join my newsletter. I'm here as a resource. A lot of what I do is just translating the value of design thinking into our project management space, because it quite often you can get caught up in some of the marketing talk that comes across as much more soft than what we're used to having. And I think that this is definitely having our users at the center of our focus, being able to do trial and error, and thinking before you start the solution is very important.
Bruce, just another question came now. How many company debates should participate in the brainstorm session?
Again, there's no set answer there. You obviously want a diverse group of thinkers. So you don't want to just have one type. You don't want all BAs. You don't want all software engineers. You don't want all project managers. So the fact that you have multiple people of different thought patterns in the room, that is what will produce better ideas.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you all. Thank you, Central Virginia chapter, for joining us today. And thank you, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night from Central Virginia.
Thank you, Ron. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Mm-hmm.